How many of you are here to hear me because I'm a presidential candidate, but you sort of can't believe you're in a yoga studio? Okay, well that's good. I think that that's America today. And I think that's a good thing. I have had a career for 35 years where being in places like yoga studios are natural for me. And that is because for 35 years I've been a writer about inspirational topics, the universal spiritual themes that are at the heart of all the great religious and spiritual traditions. Nothing outrageous. Love, forgiveness, faith, compassion. And I have been very up close and personal, particularly in the lives of people who are in crisis. I've had a career where people don't usually come to me because things are going well. I often find myself talking to the person who just got the test results and it came back malignant, or the child is addicted and they're on heroin, or someone very beloved just died, or the spouse just left, or the business is going under. And this has given me what I believe is insight. It has given me insight into two things that I think are very relevant to my being here with you tonight. Number one, I have seen how noble and intelligent people get when they get really bad news. I've seen that when people are told sometimes the worst news possible, that in the first 5 minutes, so many unimportant things just fall away. So many of the preoccupations which dominate our lives, which are so ultimately meaningless, just fall away. And that's when people get very smart. You heard what the doctor said, and now you're going to have to hear what the doctor says we're going to do about it. And so even though you might be traumatized by the news, you're very focused on listening with nobility and intelligence to the person who might have some advice. But the other thing that I have seen, particularly over the last 20 years, is something that has disturbed me about our country. And that is that I understand that when people go through crisis, that people who do work such as mine, psychotherapists, people who do spiritual counseling, etc., it's understood that we're the people in a society that are there to help people go through crises. That's what we do. But I've noticed over the last 20 years that too many Americans, given that this is the richest country in the world, too many Americans are in crises that the average citizen shouldn't be going through in the richest country in the world. I once heard a story that I think of, I don't think it has a title, but I think of as the transition from the story of the Good Samaritan to the story of the conscious Samaritan. So the Good Samaritan is walking down the road and sees a beggar and sees the beggar needing alms, so the Good Samaritan gives the beggar alms. And then the Good Samaritan continues down the road and sees another beggar and gives that beggar alms. And then the Good Samaritan continues further down the road and sees another beggar and gives the beggar alms. At a certain point, the Good Samaritan asks himself, why are there so many beggars? And that is what I have come to in my own life. Why is it in the richest country in the world that so many people who work so hard, who live good lives, are having such a rough time? Why is it that people who work hard and have families have to work more than one job? Why is it that somebody who has worked so hard and produced so much is loaded by all these college loans? And so I have seen up close and personal the effects of bad public policy. Now, I have been very active as a nonprofit activist and as a political activist. I have founded nonprofits, founded an AIDS organization, have worked on the board of an anti-poverty organization, have founded a peace organization. But what I've come to believe is that there is no amount of private charity that can compensate for a basic lack of social justice. And I don't want to hear any more politicians giving awards to people like me for helping so many people in trouble. I want to say to those politicians, why don't you stop creating so many problems? Why are there so many people in trouble? And if you can't do better than that, let the lovers get in there. Let the visionaries get in there. Let the artists get in there. Let the yogis get in there. Let the scientists get in there. Let the teachers get in there. Let the people get in there who put people first and know what people are experiencing first and have not become just an empire of whoredom to huge multinational corporations whose profits for you people come before the health and well-being of the American people, our children, the people of the world, and the planet on which we live. That's why I'm running for president. And to me, that's what a democracy is supposed to be. That was the whole point. In the U.S. Constitution, it's very interesting to me, the qualifications for running for president. The qualifications for running for president are that you were born here, check. Over 35, check. And lived here for 14 years, check. Really interesting to me, there are many places in the Constitution where it seems to me as significant what the founders did not say as what they did say. If they had wanted to say had to have been a congressman, they would have. If they had wanted to say had to have been a governor, they would have. If they had wanted to say had to have been a senator, they would have. If they had wanted to say had to have been a lawyer, they would have. But they didn't, and I believe they didn't for a reason. Because they were leaving it to every generation to determine for itself the skill set that any particular generation feels is most necessary to navigate the times in which we live. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we need a political vision more than we need another political mechanic. Political mechanics are important, but they're kind of like the best car mechanics in the world. You might have the best car mechanic in the world, and the car mechanic is important, but the car mechanic doesn't necessarily know what road should I take to Cleveland. It's the road we're on that's the problem. The car, we have the best car, and we have some good mechanics, but we've been driving in a really bad direction. And in order to drive into another direction, I believe the people need to step in now. For us to look at the political status quo that drove us into this ditch and think that only one of them is qualified to drive us out of this ditch, it doesn't even jive with the history of this country. The US government did not make the move for abolition. It was the abolitionist movement itself that arose from early evangelicals and Quakers. It was a generation of people who rose up and stepped in. That's what really drove the path towards abolition. And the same is true with women's suffragette movement. The US government did not wake up one day and just decide to give women the right to vote. It was a people's movement. It was the women's suffragette movement. People, a generation rose up, they stepped in, and that's how women got the right to vote. And the civil rights movement is the same. It wasn't that the United States government decided one day we've got to desegregate the American South. That's not what happened. Institutionalized white supremacy had been going on for a while there. It was Dr. Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, the people of the United States, who rose up and stepped in, and that is what led to civil rights in the United States and the desegregation of the American South. We are living, just like those generations lived, at a time where we need a deep, meaningful, and fundamental course correction. And I believe that just like in those former times, it's time for the people to rise up and for the people to step in. That's the history of the United States. That's what we do here. And our generation has been slyly, it's been very insidious. It has been very sly. And I think we all have to look at the ways that we ourselves have conspired with this. We have conspired with our own disempowerment. It's as though we're just spectators. We're just spectators, and they're the football players. You know, there's the Democrats or the Republicans, who's winning. And this has really served a subtly oppressive system. Because basically the only say we have is who we vote for, but more and more it actually aids people in the process, or it fosters within us the process of disengagement, whereby we don't even care to vote that much because it seems less and less to have anything to do with us. Now the only way to get that power balance and that power arrangement realigned to be in keeping with genuine democratic principle is if it begins with an awakening inside ourselves. An awakening inside ourselves which begins with the realization that we can have as president whoever we want to have as president. It begins right there. Now, what we have in our situation today, I believe, and I think many Americans believe clearly, is a president who is unworthy of the job. I believe that his behavior is unworthy of the office of president. And I use that word because Franklin Roosevelt, when he referred to the Nazis, talked about them as unworthy men. I think that's pretty amazing, given what he knew he had to do and what he made sure did happen, but he called them unworthy men. I don't feel we need to spend much time talking about Donald Trump. All of you know who Donald Trump is, and you don't need me to educate you about who he is or about what he's done. But this is how I see the election in 2020. The people who were so excited about Donald Trump, some of them still are excited about Donald Trump, and some of them are not. Those who are excited about Donald Trump have that right. This is America. This is a free country. They can vote for whoever they want. People, if they want to vote for Donald Trump, they get to vote for Donald Trump. And some of them will. And then there are other people who find the agenda of Donald Trump offensive to their beliefs. And they are going to vote for the Democrat no matter what. So you've got one group that's going to vote for Donald Trump. You've got another group that's going to vote for the Democrat no matter what. To be honest, ladies and gentlemen, for those of us who wish to see the president replaced in 2020, that's way too close to comfort. Donald Trump did not just win because of the people who were so excited about Donald Trump. Donald Trump also won, if we actually do the math, almost more because of how many people did not vote. If you put how many people did not vote and how many people voted for the third party, there you're talking about a group we need to speak to. I'm not interested in talking about how bad Donald Trump is, because I believe that there are millions of people who voted for Donald Trump who are the very least disturbed and are open to the possibility of voting for someone else. But if all we do is go on and on about how bad Donald Trump is, that's subtly making them wrong. That's shaming them. It's almost an act of emotional violence. And I don't think that that will make them want to vote for the Democrat. Even more importantly, when you look at the deeper problems in our country today, they were not all created by Donald Trump. A lot of the things which you and I need to look at were here before Donald Trump. I think of the president as a kind of opportunistic infection. He could not have gotten a hold of this country had there not been a weakened societal immune system. And I think that every voter and every citizen should think of ourselves as the immune system. And the body politic is very sick today. And the immune system must set in, and that is each and every one of us. We have a much bigger task on our hand than just replacing Donald Trump in 2020. That's like saying we didn't go over the cliff. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, we have to get out of the vicinity of the cliff. If all we do is replace Donald Trump in 2020, then certain forces will be back in the midterms in 22, and they'll be back in 24. We have to do more than replace the president. We have to transform this country. And that's why I feel that we need to prosecute more than a case against Donald Trump. We need to prosecute a case against the system that produced him. And the system that produced him is a system which many of us in our own ways have conspired with. And that's what I want to talk to you about tonight, so that we know what has happened and we can articulate a vision for what is needed in order to change what has happened. Bad public policy got us to where we are. Good public policy will begin a season of repair. Now, many of us are old enough that we have some real memory. This chapter, this aberrational chapter in American history, began in the 1980s. It began with the advent of the idea of trickle-down economics. And trickle-down economics is an amoral economic system. I'm not saying it's an immoral economic system, because it's not, but it is an amoral economic system. And therefore, we should have realized that it would produce immoral results. It's not like the promulgators of trickle-down economics sit in some room somewhere and wish anyone harm. It's not like they're saying, oh, let's destroy indigenous tribes. It's not like they're saying, ooh, let's desecrate the planet. Ooh, let's hurt children. They're not. They're simply saying, and they have been given permission to say, by government and by society at large, hey, all I'm trying to do is to create profit for my stockholders, for my shareholders. Hey, that's my job. And they have been led to believe, and the entire society has conspired in this belief that that is their only job. And so when this change happened, and I'm not trying to romanticize America before then, but I do think it's fair to say that when I was growing up, the American corporation, believe it or not, was expected to care. It was. It was like if somebody had worked for the corporation for decades, it was the assumption on the part of our culture that the corporation cared whether or not that person had a dignified retirement. But with the advent of trickle-down economics, the idea was that all the corporation should have to care about was the bottom line for the stockholders, even if that was at the expense of the worker. Yeah. Even if that was at the expense of the community. Even if that was at the expense of the environment. And the justification for that was that it was all cool, see, because that stockholder class was going to make so much money and they would create so many jobs that all of that money would trickle down and it would lift all boats. After 40 years, I think we can say that the jury is in. It has not lifted all boats. It has left millions of people without even a lifeboat, without even a life vest. It has decimated America's middle class. It has created a situation where 1% of Americans own more wealth than the bottom 90%. It has left 40 million Americans living with chronic economic anxiety. 40% of all Americans living with chronic economic anxiety. 40% of Americans. We have millions and millions and millions of Americans who live every day not knowing what will happen if I get sick. Millions and millions of Americans who don't know what will happen if one of my kids gets sick. Millions and millions of Americans not knowing how I'm going to send my kids to college. And millions of Americans living without knowing how am I ever going to get out from under this college loan debt. And even more than that, they live with the deep knowledge that their government clearly doesn't care. And they're right. Because for all intents and purposes, our government now serves more as an advocate for the short-term profits for those huge multinational corporate entities than it does as an advocate for the health and well-being of the average American, our children, and our planet. We are not now functioning. We are not now functioning as a government of the people, by the people, for the people. We're a government of huge multinational corporations, by huge multinational corporations, for huge multinational corporations, whether it's health insurance companies, big pharmaceutical companies, gun manufacturers, chemical companies, food companies, oil and gas, fossil fuel, defense contractors, nuclear. It's a new aristocracy. This has happened. What has happened to our country? That's what we rejected in 1776, and it is time to reject it again. The revolutionary spirit out of which this country was born. There's a rambunctiousness to being American. What has happened to us? We have lost our revolutionary fervor. And it turns out, and I think we all see this now, the American Revolution is actually an ongoing process. And silly us, naive us, foolish us, distracted us, irresponsible us, that we ever lost sight of that. If you don't take care of your marriage, can you be that surprised when one day they say, I'm gone? If you don't take care of your health, can you really be that shocked when you get sick? If you don't take care of your business or your money, can you really be shocked when they go south? We thought other people would handle it. We would say things like, well, I'm not political. Good luck with that one. Because let me tell you something. Like the French say, you don't do politics, politics will do you. You think other people will handle that? Guess what? They sure did. And there's no escaping the effects of public policy. I don't care how much money you have. I don't care what you do. If it's a public issue, it will get to your private door. Good luck with all that green juice, and good luck with all that gluten-free. Because if you really knew how many contaminants were in our water, if you really knew how many carcinogens were in our food, if you really knew what was going on in our topsoil, you would know I can't escape it. It's coming round to everyone. Now, it's the 11th hour, but it is not midnight yet. And as many people have said, and this is so interesting, isn't it? The president has been an awakening agent. I'm reminded of that scene in the movie Miss Congeniality, where I think it's the last scene where Deborah Winger, no, it's not Deborah Winger, it's Sandra Bullock says, I really do want world peace. I feel like a lot of people now are like, actually, I really do love democracy. They hadn't even thought about democracy. But now they're seeing things that make them really worry about like whether or not we're going to have one. And a lot of people are like, whoa, 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 what's happening? And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. This is a very pregnant moment. And so I want to tell you about what I believe we need to do in order to end an aberrational chapter in our history, in order to start a new one, and in order to initiate a season of repair. First thing, we passed in 2017 a $2 trillion tax cut. $2 trillion tax cut. 83 cents of every dollar goes to the very richest individuals and corporations. There's absolutely no evidence that this will ever even pay for itself. It's all part of this trickle down. We'll see, we're just going to make rich people have an easier time getting richer, and this will somehow help everybody. That was passed in 2017. We need to repeal that tax cut. Put back in, however, the middle class tax cut that was part of it, because I think that should have been done before. We start with that. The next thing we do is we address these corporate subsidies. Do you know that last year alone, we gave $26 billion in corporate subsidies to oil and gas? You know, Martin Luther King used to say, if they give it to rich people, they call it a subsidy. If they give it to poor people, they call it a handout. Next thing we need to do. You know, last year, big pharmaceutical companies lobbied Congress to the tune of $284 million. Oil and gas lobbied at $125 million. This is how deep this stuff goes. Now, when these huge multinational corporate entities lobby to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars, that was 284. They want a quid pro quo. They're not doing it to be charitable. So a few years ago, they got what they paid for. And that is the United States government gave away its own negotiating power with big pharmaceutical companies. So the next thing we need to do is to say the United States government can negotiate with big pharmaceutical companies to lower drug prices. I'm sure everybody here is aware of how many Americans cannot afford their insulin. And these are not numbers on a page. These are people. These are people who have children who need them. These are people who have families. These are people who have done nothing wrong. Next thing we need to do is we need to look at our military budget. Now, I have great respect for the U.S. military. My father fought in World War II. What I'm telling you is not a critique of the military. This is a critique of political decisions, not military decisions. I believe, and I'm sure most, if not all of us believe, the military should have every dollar it says it needs to provide for our legitimate security needs. But no person who is an intelligent observer believes that our military budget of $760 billion a year reflects only what the military says it needs for our legitimate security. It reflects on top of that what the defense industry says it wants in terms of short-term profit. Now, if you do all the things that I said just now, and you add to that a 3% tax on the assets of a billionaire, and there are many billionaires who agree with me. I don't know if there are many, but there are a few who have said it, right? Then you say to people who have 50 million and more, and listen, I believe in righteous commerce. I'm not anti-capitalist at all. Capitalism, fine. The problem is that what has happened over the last 40 years is a virulent strain of capitalism. So capitalism should have a conscience. Public policy and public institutions should be aligned with ethics and morality on a public level, just as we seek to be good people on a private level. So there are people, if you made 50 million and more, good on you. If it was righteous commerce, good on you. But we'd like 2%, please. Now you do the things I just said, plus that 3% on the assets of a billionaire, 2% on the assets of 50 million, and guess what we have? We have cash on hand. And let me tell you what we will do with that cash on hand. We have millions of American children, and yes, ladies and gentlemen, they're also here in Nevada. In fact, some of them are in Las Vegas. We have millions of American children who are chronically traumatized. There was a principal at a school here in Las Vegas who told me that she has elementary school students on suicide watch. We have children, we have 13 million hungry children in the United States. We have millions of American children who go to school every day and ask the teacher, "Do you have some food for me?" And I got a letter from one teacher in Texas who told me that it breaks her heart every day because she is forbidden by the district from giving that child even a cracker, because then the district itself would get less money. We have millions of American children who go to school every day in classes that do not even have the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. If a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically diminished, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. This is the richest country in the world, ladies and gentlemen. This is immoral. Now, these children should be rescued. These children should be rescued no differently than if they were the victims of a natural disaster. And let's talk about why they're not. Well, they're not old enough to vote, are they? So they're no constituency. And they're not old enough to work, so they don't have any financial leverage. So what chance do they have to compete with the clout of all those corporate dollars that flood Washington every day? This is what happens when an amoral economic system, which simply has no use for these children. People say this country should be run like a business. No, it shouldn't. It should be run like a family. You put your children first. Our public policy should be aligned with that which is true and good and righteous, no different than our personal behavior. And I don't find that the average American doesn't ask questions about what it means to live a good life. I'm a fan of the American. We're good people, we're decent people. I'm not saying we're better than other people, because I don't think we're better, but I think we're as good as anybody anywhere. And my experience of the American people is that Americans do ask questions about what it is to live a good life and how do I treat people right. But what has happened over the last few decades, and this is dangerous, and it has had dangerous consequences and will continue to have dangerous consequences until and unless we wake up. We have stopped talking about what makes a country good. I'm sure everybody here cares about whether, is my behavior, did I do the right thing? I'm sure everybody here has had conversations where you said to somebody, do you think I did the right thing? Where you're asking yourself that, well, is that really the right thing? But how many of us have asked, is America doing the right thing for the sake of $350 billion in arms sale, giving aerial support to Saudi Arabia's genocidal war against Yemen, where tens of thousands of people have starved, including children, in a way that would make our grandparents roll over in their graves? We have kept the conversation about what goodness and morality is limited to the public sphere. And I don't think the government should have anything to say about private morality, but about public morality, all of us should have something to say. So these children, a virulent strain of capitalism, has no use for the old, and it has no use for the very young. And when you have a government that should be advocating for its citizens, but instead is advocating for those corporate forces, why should we be surprised at what's happening to these children? These children are of no use to that system. That is what has happened to America. Somebody's not of use to a certain kind of economic machinery, and what? Where do you think these children are going to be in 20 years? We need a massive realignment of investment in the direction of America's children. Now, when I was young, people used to talk, politicians used to routinely talk about peace and prosperity. So one day a few years ago, I said to myself, I never hear politicians talk anymore about peace and prosperity. I thought to myself, why is that? So my first thought was, oh, Marianne, you're just getting older. It's a cliche, that's all. So they don't use those terms anymore. Then I thought to myself, that's not why they don't say it. They don't say it because it's not even the goal anymore. Because if you want prosperity in America, I'll tell you what you would do. You would make it a national goal to actualize the God-given potential of the brain of every kindergartner in America. First of all, just on a level of morality, when you're the richest country in the world and you are withholding education from any child, that's a passive form of oppression. And let's be real about that. We are one of the only countries in the world that bases our educational funding on property taxes. Hello, America. So if a child is raised in a financially advantaged neighborhood, that child has a very good chance of a high-quality public education. But if that child didn't win the birth lottery when it comes to money, and that child is raised in a not so politically, financially advantaged family, even a family in poverty, which millions and millions are. So if you want to see the entrepreneurial genius of this country, if you want to see the entrepreneurial potential of this country, I'll tell you where it lies. It lies in every kindergarten, in every neighborhood in America. When you think of any kindergarten in which we are not doing everything possible with young children to help them develop their brain power, be very clear. We are withholding from our own future earnings millions, billions, possibly trillions of dollars that this country will never see. But that's okay, you see, because the system has become so corrupted and is so morally rotten that those aren't the kids they really want to be making money anyway. Now, like I said, I've seen how noble and intelligent people get when they get the bad news. So I'm not a politician who's been briefed on what you want to hear. I'm not a politician who's been told, oh, I think your group wants this, so I'll tell you, I'll give you this. Oh, I think your group wants this, so I'll tell you this. That's not what we're doing here. I don't believe that's what leadership should be. I think a leader should tell you what we all really need to look at, because I think we're good people. And I don't believe people who don't live in poor neighborhoods don't care about the poor. I don't. I just think we have a political system now where nobody's talking to you about it. On that debate stage, anybody talking about poverty? Anybody talking about hungry kids? Anybody talking about the military-industrial complex other than me and Tulsi? What does that tell you? What does that tell you? We need a massive realignment of investment in the direction of America's children, and I want a United States Department of Children and Youth, because it's more than just education. Obviously, we need universal preschool. Obviously, teachers need more money. Obviously, we need smaller class size. Obviously, we need to get rid of that high-stakes testing. Obviously, we need to return the art of education to the American teacher. It's like William Butler Yeats said, education should be the lighting of a fire, not the filling of a pail. But we have millions of children in this country who are traumatized even before preschool. We need community wraparound services. We need anti-trauma. We need conflict resolution. We need restorative justice. We need violence prevention. I meet teachers everywhere I go. They say, I'm not equipped. I wasn't told I was going to be dealing with children with behavioral problems all day. We need to deal with nutrition. We need to deal with hunger. We need to deal with the whole person. That's why I have a whole person childhood plan. Now, I'll tell you something. What I have found here in Nevada is what I find everywhere in this country. And I find it when it comes to children, but I also find it when it comes to the environment. I also find it when it comes to peace building. We have the people who know what to do. We do. You have them here, you have them in every state. You have the social workers, you have the educators, you have the experts in early childhood. You're not lacking the people who know what to do. That's not the problem. It's that the people who know what to do, I see this everywhere I go. This is staggering to me how everywhere I go I got the same number. I will meet people who are the social workers who are working with traumatized children, etc. And they're doing good work. And I'll say, how many of the children in your district or in your city that you believe need your services, how many do you think you're helping? And the number that I get all over this country, which I find weird, is the following: 10 to 15%. So we have a lot of people who are doing fundraisers for See if they can raise $50,000. See if they can raise $100,000. Well, our government is giving millions of dollars, and even what amounts to billions of dollars, to the forces that make all that suffering inevitable. You think any of this is going to change unless we wake up and make a change? Because it's not. Next thing we're going to do with all that money is we are going to face the fact that our national security agenda is based more on endless preparation for war than it is on actually proactively waging and declaring peace. You can't just take medicine, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else. You have to also cultivate health. Sickness is the absence of health. Health isn't the absence of sickness. And war is the absence of peace. Peace isn't the absence of war. In the body politic, you could liken preventative health and nutrition and exercise and healthy lifestyle to what's called peace building. And internationally, there are 4 factors which, when present, indicate that there will be a higher incidence of peace and a lower incidence of violence. Number 1, expanded economic opportunities for women, expanded educational opportunities for children, reduction of violence against women, and amelioration of unnecessary human suffering. We should see large groups of desperate people, whether in a corner of a city in the United States or somewhere else in the world. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk. Duh. Desperate people do desperate things. Desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. And so all public policy should be based around the core principle of what helps people thrive. Because when people are thriving, when their dreams are uncapped, when their spirits are unleashed, when they can become who they wish to be, there is greater peace and there is greater prosperity. But we have a $760 billion military budget. Our State Department, which is diplomacy, development, and mediation, that's only $40 billion. Within the $40 billion is $17 billion to USAID, which is long-term development and humanitarian assistance. And then there's another $1 billion, less than $1 billion on peace building. I read an article from a couple of years ago talking about our national security agenda. How's this for wicked? Airstrikes are in, diplomacy's out. There's a lot of money to be made on those airstrikes, ladies and gentlemen. Not so much money to be made on helping people live. Once again, we need to step up, we need to rise up, and we need to step in. That's why I want a United States Department of Peace, because the peace builders should have an equal seat at the table of power. The peace builders should be equal to military. When we have a national security agenda meeting, first of all, when we were talking before about those children, in my economic councils, you know what we'd have on our economic councils? More elementary school teachers. Well, I say more, like there are any right now. But anybody who can tell us what we need to know about helping a child actualize their potential, that's the person who tells us what we need to know about creating an amazing economy 20 years from now. Because if you want an amazing economy 20 years from now, you help your 10-year-olds today. And if you want to talk about actually providing the possibility of peace on this planet for future generations, you don't just talk to the people who are experts at preparing for war, even though we need those people. And we certainly need a strong and a healthy military. There's no question about that. But we should look at that like a surgeon. If America needs surgery, we need to have the best surgeon. But a sane person tries to avoid surgery if possible. So those who are helping us, guiding us to peace games. We don't just need war games, we need peace games. We should have a peace academy for the peace builders, just like we have a military academy for those who are learning the arts of war. These are the pillars of a season of repair. Another thing we need to do is to realize that for a country, just like for an individual, you can't have the future you want if you're not willing to clean up the past. Ladies and gentlemen, the turbulence of racial relationships in this country. This has to do not only with Black Americans, but it also has to do with reparative justice measures that we need to take in terms of Native Americans. We have some things to clean up. Let this generation be the one that does it. Racism was America's original character defect. We're a country that was founded on a profound dichotomy. It's built into our DNA. On one hand, you had men who were risking their lives to sign the Declaration of Independence, the most noble, the most aspirational, the most enlightened principles that have ever formed the core of any country's founding. Amazing. All men are created equal. God gave all men inalienable rights of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Governments are instituted to secure those rights. And if government's not doing its job, it's the right of the people to alter it and abolish it. That's amazing. That was a repudiation of aristocracy. It was extraordinary. And out of the 54 signers of the Declaration, 41 of them were slave owners. That's our characterological dichotomy. It's always been with us. On one hand, we're based on the most enlightened principles, and from the beginning, we have often been the most violent perpetrators of transgression against those principles. It's been true of every generation, and you know what, ladies and gentlemen? No less in ours. But if you look at the narrative of American history, we tend to self-correct. We had slavery, but then we also had abolition. We had the suppression of women, but we also had two major waves of feminism and the women's suffragette movement. We had institutionalized white supremacy and segregation in the American South, but we also had the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. It's simply our turn. We're not dealing with these problems that I'm talking to you about tonight, with problems any greater than other generations had to face. Let's just not be the first generation to wimp out on doing what it takes in our time to push back against the forces that would erode our democracy and to exalt those forces which make us healed and whole. It's simply our turn. So I believe that it is time to pay reparations for slavery. There was an economic gap. At the end of the Civil War, there were between 4 and 5 million formerly enslaved people. And let's remember, slavery had been in this country for 249 years. And we should take a moment of silence to just really allow yourself to take that in. That was then followed by another 100 years of institutionalized violence against black people. And we're good people. I don't think the average American is a racist. I think the average American is undereducated about the history of race. Just hasn't really thought about that. 250 years of slavery followed by another 100 years. I mean, what do you call lynchings if not domestic terror? What do you call Ku Klux Klan if not domestic terror? Throughout the South, there were what were called the Black Code Laws. Every black person in this room, they know what the Black Code Laws are. A lot of white Americans don't know what the Black Code Laws were. So I'll tell you what they were. Once the federal troops left, because at the end of the Civil War, federal troops were stationed in the South to ensure that slavery would not be reinstituted. And during those 12 years, some really great things happened. You had black senators, black congressmen, it really showed what was possible. But as soon as the federal troops left, the old guard of the white Southerners, they swept in. They passed what were called the Black Code Laws to ensure subpar economic, social, and political opportunities for black people. None of that was over, ladies and gentlemen, until 1965. 1964 with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, 1965 the Voting Rights Act, but even the Voting Rights Act since 2013 has been chipped away at, which is why we have all these voter suppression efforts. The economic gap has never been closed. Tecumseh Sherman, U.S. General, did promise 40 acres and a mule, we've all heard that, to every formerly enslaved family of 4, but that promise was rescinded. The gap not only has never been closed, but there have been many instances where there have been accumulations of black wealth that then local and state governments have thwarted. And in many ways, as we all know, in many ways we're actually sliding backwards. Mass incarceration means we're sliding backwards. Racial disparity in criminal sentence means we've been sliding backwards. Voter suppression efforts mean sliding backwards. Race-based policies are different than reparations. Race-based policies are good. They give some economic restitution. The reason I want reparations is because reparations carry moral force. Our repair must be moral. It is immoral to spend more on war than on peace. It is immoral not to save your children. And it is immoral not to recognize that when you have a debt, you pay it. The moral force of reparations carries an inherent mea culpa. It is the acknowledgement on the part of a people of a wrong that has been done, a debt that is owed, and the willingness on the part of a people to pay the debt. Germany has paid $89 billion to Jewish organizations since World War II. It doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen, but it has gone far towards reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Europe. What I propose is 200 to 500 billion that would be dispersed over a period of 20 years. And it would be dispersed to a Reparations Council of people who are themselves descendants of American slaves from a wide array of academia. There's a gentleman named Sandy Darity, who is a professor at Duke University, who has been doing studies on reparations for a very long time. People such as that, leaders in culture, leaders in government, leaders in academia, etc. And the stipulation on the part of the US government would be this, that the money is to be used for purposes of economic and educational renewal. It might be historical black colleges, it might be venture capital for black businesses. I think there's something very powerful about the fact it really would not be white Americans to decide. If I owe you money, I don't get to tell you how to spend it. And the problem I have with just race-based policies is it seems to me a continuation of the same paternalistic pattern. I messed with you, now let me tell you how I'm going to fix you. It doesn't quite go all the way. We need a deeper level of repair, and that's why I propose that our generation be one that gets this thing done. Otherwise, we just continue to pass along this racial turbulence generation to generation. And then the last pillar of what I see as the moral politics that we need to face is a very big one. And they're all big, but this is another one, like the others, where we have to face the bad news. We have to face the bad news, because if we face the bad news, then we can get to the other side of it and find that extraordinary impulse for motivation and ingenuity and genius and doing great things that lies within the American people. We have 12 years to reverse climate change. We have 12 years, or we could experience a level of social collapse on this planet unseen in the modern era. If we do not, we don't mean just stopping it. We're talking about reversing it now. If we do not reverse it, we could have such food shortages, mass starvation, whole swaths of countries and continents that are basically uninhabitable. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, I'm talking to you in Las Vegas. If you've been reading at all, Las Vegas is right in the line for some heat that might make it real difficult to even be here. And in some countries, that would mean also where the food, not only it is uninhabitable, you're living in a country where if, God forbid, you can't live in Las Vegas anymore, there is Austin, Texas. But we're talking about some places in the world where you could be talking about hundreds of millions of climate refugees, ladies and gentlemen. You could be talking about mass starvation, food shortages, refugee crises, unlike even anything we have seen, and we're dealing with a serious one today. We need a World War II level mass mobilization, and we can do this. We can do this. We can do this. We're American, but we have to face what's going on. If we do, we need to shift. It's as simple as this. We need to shift from a dirty economy to a clean economy. And we can. We're American. We need to shift from a war economy to a peace economy. And we can. There's more money to be made in investment in education and infrastructure than there is in defense spending. But we have to wake up. Stop waiting for the status quo establishment political system to lead this train. They're not gonna, because it's too entrenched. Good people. I'm not running against anyone. I'm running with a lot of really good people. But I do challenge the idea that only people whose careers have been entrenched for decades in the system that drove us into this ditch are possibly qualified to lead us out of this ditch. There are other kinds of qualifications, like moral certitude. Other kinds of qualifications, like such a deep, passionate sense and insight into the pain that this craziness has caused people and will continue to cause people, that I, as an American woman and as an American mother, say not on my watch. That is what we need in this country.
Oh, I love that.
And so I don't need to tell anybody here anymore about the problems that we have in this country, because we're all intelligent people and we know. We have, in addition to all that, some people who seriously hate. We have some serious bigots and some serious racists and some serious anti-Semites and some serious homophobes and some serious Islamophobes and all of that. We've always had them in this country, but we thought we had reached a consensus that there were limits on both the left and the right, past which we would not go. That no people who represented those kinds of voices would be given serious political megaphones. Clearly, those levees have fallen. Partly because of social media, and partly because we have a person of no less power than the presidency of the United States that has not been above harnessing those things and exploiting those things for his own political purposes. But the problem is not that there are more haters than lovers in this country. I think there are a lot more lovers in this country and a lot more lovers in this world. The problem is those who hate today, they hate with conviction. And conviction is a force multiplier. And at a time when hate is loud, love cannot afford to whisper. We need to love with as much conviction as is now displayed by those who hate. And when you love with conviction, it can't just be love of your own kids. It has to also be love for the children on the other side of town, love for the children on the other side of the world. The love that will save the world means it can't just be my kids. It has to be kids in other neighborhoods in this country that do not have the advantages that my kids have. And it has to be love for those children in Yemen. And it has to be love for this entire world. And no generation, just like no person should live only for ourselves, no generation should live only for itself. We need to wake up. We need a moral and spiritual awakening. And we need to give that political force, just like some very low energies had been given political force. It's 11th hour, but it's not midnight yet. But we can't take a long time. We can't like ramp this up. We got to do it now. And along with that, let me just point out, I'm not doing this to just elevate the conversation. We need to do a whole lot more than elevate the conversation. Oh, it's so wonderful what she's saying. It's so good that this is part of the conversation. Don't you get what a game that is? Don't you get it? We need to do more than elevate the conversation. We need to elevate this country, and we need to do it quickly. Please consider voting for me, caucusing for, what is a caucus here, right? Caucus. If you feel that your ideas do not resonate with mine, I totally respect that. But if they do resonate with mine, please work with me and let's make this happen. You make me president. In our time, it will one day be said, they got there late, but boy, once they got there, they slammed it like nobody's business. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.